Today, we uncover what happened to these people who went cage diving and how it ended in disaster. From a vlogger crushed against the bars of her own cage without a single bite, to a first-time swimmer who fell through an unlocked door into tiger shark-infested water. But first, we start off with the Moore family's last moments, mauled inside the cage by sharks. It was June 14th, 2016, off the coast of Gansby, South Africa, a stretch of ocean so dense with great whites that locals call it Shark Alley. The water was dark, cold, and churning under overcast skies, with visibility dropping to just a few meters. This was the kind of place where you feel predators before you see them, where movement beneath the surface always meant something was watching, circling just out of sight below them. The Moore family had traveled here for what was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. Gary Moore, 52, was a mechanical contractor, a man who understood how systems fail. His wife Glenda, 50, a school administrator, was more cautious but trusted the professionals. Their son Leo, 27, was a fitness trainer and thrill seeker with an action camera strapped to his chest, while their daughter Lisa, 24, worked in hospitality and had the least experience in open water. What they booked wasn't a regulated dive, but an off-record, experimental cage experience, marketed as private and unrestricted. The cage had been modified for visibility, with reduced bar spacing near the top hatch and a simplified latch system that removed redundant locking points. It promised a closer encounter, but quietly removed the safety layers standard operations relied on, increasing exposure with every design compromise made. Before entering, Gary questioned the latch system. The crew demonstrated it quickly, insisting it was secure. What they didn't disclose was that the latch had already failed to seat properly earlier and had only been forced into position instead of repaired, leaving a hidden point of failure under stress. Great white sharks are apex predators capable of explosive vertical acceleration and immense bite force. In breach scenarios, they don't hesitate. They commit fully, driven by speed, instinct, and precise targeting. The family entered the cage as waves splashed over the top hatch. Unlike regulated dives, bait lines were deployed aggressively and far closer than recommended, drawing multiple sharks into tight competing movements around the cage, increasing unpredictability with each pass beneath them. Then it happened. A large great white surged upward toward bait being pulled too close to the surface. It accelerated from below in a full breach attempt. The shark's snout and upper body slammed into the hatch with violent upward force. The latch failed instantly, and the hatch blew open. For a split second, the shark's head forced into the opening, and then its jaws reacted. Gary was directly beneath it. The bite wasn't exploratory, it was reflexive and full. The jaws closed across his upper torso inside the cage, crushing inward before releasing as the shark lost momentum and slipped back into the water. The damage was immediate and catastrophic. The cage erupted into chaos as water surged in and the structure rocked violently. Bodies collided against steel bars, and orientation was lost almost instantly in the confined space, leaving no clear sense of direction or control. Panic broke whatever control remained. Leo forced his way upward through the open hatch, pulling himself into open water. Lisa followed seconds behind, scrambling out after him as staying inside felt more dangerous than outside. Inside, Glenda was thrown sideways, her leg wedged beneath a lower crossbar as the cage tilted. She struggled to free herself, but each movement was countered by shifting weight and incoming water. Outside the cage, the situation deteriorated even faster. Leo surfaced disoriented, blood trailing from his head after striking the frame. The disturbance redirected attention. A second great white approached from below, striking upward and pulling him under before he could react. Lisa tried to swim toward the boat, but the water around her had already become an active feeding zone. Another shark moved in from behind. The strike came laterally, knocking her off the surface and pulling her under in seconds. Inside the cage, Glenda remained trapped as water surged repeatedly through the open hatch. Each wave forced her lower. She inhaled water before anyone could reach her, her strength fading rapidly with each passing second. The shark that breached had already withdrawn. No prolonged entry, only impact, a single bite, and disappearance. Crew engaged the winch within seconds. Gary showed no signs of survivable life. Glenda was unresponsive upon extraction. Leo and Lisa were not recovered in time to be saved. The investigation exposed what had been hidden beneath the promise of exclusivity: unregulated modifications, ignored mechanical faults, and unsafe baiting practices that removed any margin for error. Gary, Glenda, Leo, and Lisa Moore entered the water trusting a system designed to separate them from one of the ocean's most efficient predators. Instead, that system failed, and in seconds, the barrier between protection and exposure vanished completely, leaving them exposed. But for Lana Kesh, it wasn't the ocean that turned deadly, it was the cage itself. When a tiger shark transformed steel into a crushing force she never saw coming. It was September 3rd, 2015, off the Neptune Islands, South Australia. A remote chain of rocky outcrops surrounded by deep, cold water teeming with marine life. The islands sit at the edge of the continental shelf where nutrient-rich currents draw in large pelagic predators year-round. Seal colonies cluster along the rocks, and where seals gather, apex predators follow. The water was rough that morning. Swells rolled in heavy, rocking everything on the surface. Boats, buoys, and cages alike. Lana Kesh, 31, was a freelance travel vlogger who had built a following documenting close-range wildlife encounters across the globe. She was not reckless by reputation, but she was known for pushing proximity, getting the shot others wouldn't attempt. She had selected this operator specifically because they used a surface-level cage positioned to maximize visibility of shark approaches near the waterline. For Lana, this was content. The closer the animal, the better the footage. She was diving with her partner. The operator ran a fast-paced baiting system, dragging tuna across the surface to keep sharks engaged and circling near the cage. During earlier runs, crew noted repeated close passes from larger sharks, including a tiger shark measured at approximately 4 meters. Activity levels were elevated. The animals were committed. Tiger sharks are among the most versatile and dangerous predators in the ocean. Unlike great whites, which tend toward ambush strikes from below, tiger sharks are lateral hunters, slow cruisers that can explode into short bursts of acceleration. They possess wide jaws lined with serrated teeth designed to shear through bone, shell, and cartilage. A 4-meter tiger shark can generate enormous force in a single-body collision and does not shy from unfamiliar objects. They investigate with contact. Lana positioned herself at the forwardmost section of the cage, pressing close to the bars with her camera extended outward through the gaps. The cage was a surface-level floating design, tethered to the vessel with noticeable slack, enough to allow lateral swing in heavy swells. Bait was pulled across the surface directly in front of her, drawing sharks along a path parallel to the cage wall. This was the fatal mistake. She had placed herself at the exact convergence point, where the bait trajectory met the cage face, with slack tether allowing free movement on impact. The tiger shark came from below at a shallow upward angle, accelerating toward the bait in a committed burst. It did not breach. Instead, it collided laterally into the cage at full speed. The impact was massive. The initial strike delivered a high-energy blunt force event, driving the cage off-axis and transferring momentum into Lana's body. The cage, already loose on its tether, swung violently inward toward the vessel hull. Lana's body was driven into the steel bars by the force of the collision, her chest compressed between the rigid cage and her forward-leaning position. Multiple ribs fractured on impact. This first impact caused the primary injury, severe blunt chest trauma, and immediate compromise of lung expansion. Within less than a second, the swinging cage struck the boat hull. The abrupt deceleration intensified compressive force across her torso. This secondary collision acted as the fatal escalation, sharply increasing pressure across her chest cavity. The secondary impact caused pulmonary contusion and ruptured blood vessels within her chest cavity. Internal bleeding began immediately. The shark disengaged instantly after collision. It did not circle back. It did not bite. The entire event lasted under 2 seconds. No jaws involved, no teeth marks. Just force, raw, blunt, mechanical force delivered by an estimated 500 to 900 kilograms of muscle mass, hitting a floating steel box with a human pressed against the wrong side of it. Lana remained conscious briefly. She was upright but unable to draw effective breaths. Her chest wall had lost structural integrity. Each inhale produced diminishing returns as fractured ribs shifted and lung tissue swelled. Crew pulled her from the cage immediately, but the damage was internal and catastrophic. Over the next several minutes, her breathing became shallow and labored. Her condition deteriorated due to pulmonary contusion, internal bleeding, and progressive hypoxia. Blood filled the pleural space, compressing her lungs further. Oxygen levels dropped. Loss of effective respiration was not instantaneous, but rapidly progressive over minutes. She died on the deck from traumatic asphyxia compounded by internal hemorrhage, without a single bite wound. The incident prompted a review of cage tethering systems and bait trajectory protocols relative to diver positioning. Public reaction was sharp. Many struggled to understand how a shark could kill someone inside a cage without breaking through it. Lana Kesh never expected the cage itself to be what killed her. Neither did Bevan Trawl, a construction foreman who stepped into a submerged cage off Isla Guadalupe, confident that the steel around him was enough. But 5 meters below the surface, a bull shark found the one weakness in the design that nobody accounted for. It was January 22, 2017, off the coast of Isla Guadalupe, Mexico. a volcanic island roughly 240 kilometers west of the Baja Peninsula, surrounded by some of the clearest water in the Pacific. Visibility here can exceed 30 meters on a good day, which is exactly why it became one of the most sought-after cage diving destinations in the world. But on this morning, conditions were different. A sediment plume from recent swells had reduced visibility to moderate levels. The water was darker than usual. Shapes below moved in and out of view without warning. Bevan Trawl, 38, was a construction foreman from outside Los Angeles, physically strong, confident in high-risk environments, and comfortable making decisions under pressure. He had spent his career working at heights, around heavy machinery, and in conditions where situational awareness meant the difference between going home and not. He approached the dive the same way he approached a job site: assess the equipment, trust the structure, get in and get it done. He was diving with a group of friends. The operation used a submerged cage lowered approximately 5 meters below the surface, supplied by airlines from the boat above. The cage was not a modern standard commercial model, but an older design with a slightly modified lower section, sections that had been reworked and showed signs of wider than typical spacing. The steel bars were welded in a grid pattern intended to prevent entry, but along the lower panel, the gaps were noticeably wider than current safety norms, likely a result of wear, modification, or outdated construction rather than intentional design. Earlier divers had noticed how much easier it was to see bait through those lower gaps. Nobody flagged it as a concern. Great white sharks are built for high-speed predatory strikes, larger, more streamlined, and capable of sudden vertical acceleration from below. Unlike bulkier species, they rely on precision timing and explosive force, often committing to a single decisive bite. Their jaws do not need full entry to cause catastrophic damage. Even partial contact is enough. At Guadalupe, they are the primary species drawn to baited cage dives. Bevan positioned himself near the bottom edge of the cage as bait was lowered beneath the structure. His legs were close to the widened lower bars. In the reduced visibility, shapes appeared and disappeared in the murk, dark silhouettes gliding just beyond clear sight. This was the fatal mistake. Standing with his leg pressed directly against the widest gap in the cage during active baiting below, a great white shark approached from beneath at a steep upward angle, accelerating toward the bait in a committed vertical burst. In the reduced visibility, there was no warning, no slow pass, no circling. The shark came straight up. Its head did not enter the cage. Instead, as it surged upward, its jaws snapped laterally across the exterior of the bars, teeth projecting through the widened gap just enough to intercept Bevan's exposed lower leg. The bite occurred entirely from outside the cage. The force was immediate and catastrophic. The shark's teeth, broad, triangular, and heavily serrated, cut through wetsuit material, skin, and muscle in an instant. The bite drove his leg into the steel bars, pinning him in place rather than pulling him outward. His body slammed against the cage from the inside. The shark executed a single lateral thrash, a violent rotational movement lasting less than a second before releasing. That one motion was enough. The thrash tore through deep tissue and shattered bone, producing compound fractures in the lower leg. The femoral artery was likely severed or critically damaged by the combination of direct bite trauma and twisting force transmitted upward through the limb. The shark withdrew immediately. It did not return. One approach, one bite, one thrash, and it was gone. Blood poured from the wound at a rate no field intervention could control. The water inside the cage turned dark within seconds. Bevan remained conscious initially, gripping the bars above him, but his strength faded rapidly. His dive partners signaled distress, and emergency ascent began immediately. During the lift, approximately 1 minute after the bite, Bevan lost consciousness. By the time the cage broke the surface, there was no pulse to recover. He died from exsanguination, a single external strike from a great white that exploited a structural spacing flaw without ever breaching the cage itself. The incident triggered an investigation into cage bar spacing standards and whether submerged cages with widened lower sections should be permitted during active baiting. Public reaction centered on a single question: how could a cage designed to keep sharks out still allow a fatal bite through it? Bevan Trawl trusted the steel around him the same way Lana Kesh had trusted hers. For Mott Skad, a commercial fisherman off the Farallon Islands, it wasn't a flaw in the cage that put him in danger. It was his own hands reaching for something the crew told him never to touch. It was November 9th, 2018, near the Farallon Islands, California. A jagged cluster of granite peaks rising from the Pacific, roughly 43 kilometers west of San Francisco. The islands are a national wildlife refuge, closed to the public, surrounded by water so cold and dark it borders on black beneath the surface. Great white sharks patrol these waters every autumn, drawn by massive elephant seal colonies along the rocks. This is not a tourist-friendly stretch of ocean. The swells are heavy, the currents unpredictable, and the animals here are wild, full-sized apex predators operating in their primary hunting ground. Mott Skad, 44, was a commercial fisherman based out of Half Moon Bay. He had spent 2 decades working on the water, hauling lines, handling gear, reading conditions. He was the kind of man who had been around ropes and rigging so long that caution had been replaced by routine. He knew how lines behaved under tension. He knew how fast things could go wrong on a deck. And precisely because of that experience, he carried a confidence that made him difficult to instruct. Crew briefings were background noise. Safety warnings were for people who didn't already know the ocean. He signed on for a cage dive as a solo participant. The operation used a standard surface cage with regulated bar spacing, well-maintained and meeting industry requirements. Before the dive, crew went through safety protocol, which included one repeated instruction: do not touch the bait lines, do not reach through the bars, do not interact with anything outside the cage. Mott acknowledged the briefing the way someone acknowledges a terms of service agreement: present but not engaged. Great white sharks in the Farallon Islands are among the largest documented anywhere in the world. Females regularly exceed 5 meters. They are ambush predators that rely on explosive acceleration from below, launching toward prey at the surface with speed and commitment that leaves almost no reaction window. Their bite delivers extremely high force, and their jaws extend forward during a strike in a motion called jaw protrusion, slightly increasing reach beyond the resting position of the mouth rather than dramatically extending it. When a great white commits to a target, anything immediately in front of that strike path is at risk. Mott entered the cage alone. Bait lines trailed chunks of tuna at the surface to draw sharks into visual range. Multiple great whites were circling, making passes near the cage. Then Mott reached through the bars and grabbed a bait line. He pulled it toward him, a reflexive, familiar motion for a man who had spent his life hauling lines on commercial boats. But this was not a fishing line under controlled tension. This was a bait tether connected to an active attractant in water surrounded by apex predators. A great white locked onto the bait and accelerated. The line snapped taut instantly. Mott's arm, threaded through the bars and wrapped around the rope, was pinned against the steel. The force wrenched his arm outward and dragged his shoulder tight against the cage, twisting his upper body so that the side of his torso was partially forced into the bar gap. He could not release his grip fast enough. The shark struck the bait at full speed. Its jaws extended forward in protrusion, and instead of reaching deep into the cage, the bite intersected with what was exposed. His trapped arm and the outer edge of his side pressed against the bars. The shark made direct contact with the arm and clipped into the adjacent torso edge in a single, compressed bite. Not a sustained attack, not a targeted strike, a single reflexive clamp that caught flesh that had been pulled into its path. The shark released immediately and withdrew. It did not return. The entire sequence, line grab, tension lock, shark strike, contact, release, lasted only seconds. The damage from that single moment was catastrophic. The primary trauma centered on the arm, but the bite extended into the lateral torso margin, fracturing ribs and breaching the abdominal wall at the point of exposure. Internal organs sustained direct trauma. Severe hemorrhaging began immediately. Mott collapsed inside the cage. He remained conscious briefly but deteriorated rapidly as blood pressure dropped and shock set in. Crew initiated immediate retrieval. The cage was pulled and Mott was extracted onto the deck within minutes, but the internal bleeding was beyond what any on-site intervention could address. He did not die instantly. He succumbed minutes later to massive internal bleeding and trauma sustained during that single bite. The incident led to a review of safety rules, especially preventing divers from reaching through cage bars during baiting. Public focus shifted from the shark to the decisions that put a man within striking distance of an animal that never meant to hit him. Mott Skad's experience on the water was what made him dangerous to himself. For Tanna Brock, it was the opposite, a first-time participant off the coast of Oahu who had never been in open water before, trusting a cage door that was never fully locked. It was March 5th, 2015, off the north shore of Oahu, Hawaii, a coastline known for massive surf, deep channels, and warm, nutrient-rich water, supporting one of the densest shark populations in the Central Pacific. Beneath the surface, visibility was good, but the water column dropped off sharply beyond the reef line, creating a transition zone where open ocean predators regularly cruise near the shallows. Tour boats operated year-round, running snorkel and cage diving excursions marketed as safe, controlled encounters with pelagic sharks. sharks. The conditions that morning were calm on the surface. Underneath, the current was steady and the water was active. Tana Brock, 29, was a retail manager from Portland, Oregon. She had no background in marine activities. She was not a strong swimmer and had never been in open ocean water before. Hawaii was a vacation, a week off with friends. The cage dive was not her idea. She had been talked into it, reassured by the operator's safety record and the promise that participants would remain enclosed. For someone with no frame of reference for ocean risk, the cage represented a guarantee. The operation used a floating surface cage with a side entry door secured by a sliding bolt latch. The design was simple: slide the bolt forward and the door locks flush. But the latch had a known flaw. It could appear fully engaged while only partially seated, leaving the bolt resting against the strike plate without entering the receiver. Without a firm pull test, there was no reliable way to confirm full engagement. On this dive, the crew performed only a visual check and skipped the pull test, a brief oversight. The door was closed and visually confirmed, but not physically tested. Tiger sharks are the dominant large predator in Hawaiian waters. They are powerful and adapted to coastal environments where human activity overlaps with their hunting patterns. Unlike great whites, which often strike and release, tiger sharks show sustained investigative behavior. They approach slowly, circle deliberately, and engage unfamiliar objects through direct contact, often with their mouths. A single exploratory bite can be fatal due to the damage from their serrated jaws. Tana entered the cage with her group. Tiger sharks were already circling at a distance, slow, wide passes tightening as the boat drew attention. The water was clear enough to track them. Everything appeared controlled. Then Tana leaned back against the side door. The partially seated bolt disengaged under her weight. The door swung outward and she fell into open water. There was no warning. One moment she was inside the cage. The next she was outside it, surfacing with multiple tiger sharks nearby. She surfaced and immediately tried to swim back. The distance was short, only a few meters, but she was not a capable swimmer, and the shock of sudden exposure caused rapid loss of coordination. A tiger shark adjusted its path and approached. The pass was slow and direct. It delivered a single exploratory bite to her upper leg. The teeth cut deep into the quadriceps, severing muscle and major blood vessels. The injury was immediately debilitating. Her ability to kick dropped to almost nothing. Blood entered the water. The shark circled away briefly, then returned on a second pass. The interval lasted seconds, consistent with investigative behavior. This time, it targeted the torso. The bite was deeper, jaws closing across the midsection with enough force to penetrate the abdominal wall. The damage was severe. Internal bleeding began on a scale that could not be reversed in open water. The shark released and moved off. The interaction was not frenzied. No thrashing, no rapid repeated strikes. 2 deliberate passes. Tana lost mobility almost immediately after the second bite. She remained at the surface briefly, but was unable to swim or maintain position. Crew attempted recovery, but were delayed due to the shark remaining nearby. By the time they reached her, about 1 to 2 minutes after the door failure, she was unresponsive. She had lost consciousness from blood loss. She died from cumulative injuries sustained during the 2 bite events. The incident triggered an investigation into latch design standards for cage diving operations in Hawaiian waters. Regulators examined whether sliding bolt systems without secondary locking mechanisms should be permitted on commercial enclosures. Public reaction was severe. The idea that a door could appear locked without being secured. It was July 22, 2020 at Tiger Beach, Bahamas, a shallow sand flat off the western edge of Grand Bahama Island and one of the most well-known shark diving locations on the planet. The bottom sits at roughly 6 to 8 meters, a pale expanse of sand stretching in every direction with almost nowhere to hide. The water is warm, clear, and deceptively calm. On any given dive day, multiple tiger sharks move through in slow, overlapping circuits, drawn by bait crates placed by operators running structured encounters. It looks controlled, but the animals are not captive or trained. They are full-sized apex predators choosing to be there. Victor Hale, 41, was a real estate broker and recreational diver with fewer than 40 logged dives, most on controlled reef sites. He had no experience with large predator encounters. Tiger Beach was a significant step up, but the operation's safety reputation gave him enough confidence to book. The briefing was thorough. Stay low to the sand. Maintain eye contact with approaching sharks. Do not turn your back. Do not drift from the group. Guides carried metal redirect poles to manage shark spacing. The system worked, but only if every diver maintained discipline. During an earlier dive, Victor showed signs of difficulty. He struggled with neutral buoyancy, drifting upward repeatedly, and turned his back on approaching sharks more than once. The issues were noted, but not enough to pull him from the water. Tiger sharks are among the most deliberate predators in any ocean. They do not rush or chase. They close distance in slow, steady passes, reading the environment with patience that makes them far more dangerous than fast disaster species. Their jaws are wide, their teeth designed to shear through bone, and a single investigative bite can inflict unsurvivable damage. They are not aggressive by default, but they do not tolerate vulnerability. A target that breaks eye contact, moves erratically, or separates from a group triggers a shift from curiosity to commitment. The group descended and formed a loose semicircle around the bait crates. Guides actively managed spacing with poles. The system was functioning. Victor started in position, but gradually lost buoyancy control. Overinflation of his BCD combined with inconsistent breathing lifted him several meters above the group. He drifted behind the formation. Simultaneously, two sharks approached on intersecting paths, pulling the nearest guide's attention as they redirected both animals. Victor was within general view, but outside immediate reach. From his elevated position, his silhouette became sharply defined against the bright surface. He was no longer part of the group's visual mass. Isolated, elevated, and backlit. A large tiger shark approached from below at a low angle, partially obscured by glare. The approach was steady, not a charge. Victor registered the shark only at close range. He turned abruptly and kicked, creating sudden erratic movement that broke eye contact and exposed his lower body at a vulnerable angle. The shark had already closed to investigative distance. Victor's reaction did not deter it. The turn presented his lower torso and upper thigh directly in the shark's path. It delivered a single bite. The jaws closed across the junction of his lower torso and upper leg with enormous force, severing the femoral artery and inflicting catastrophic internal trauma. The impact spun Victor as the shark released immediately and veered off, circling at short distance, but not re-engaging. Blood spread rapidly. Victor lost buoyancy control and drifted upward, unresponsive. Guides reacted within seconds, intercepting nearby sharks with poles before reaching him. He was secured and rushed toward the surface. Consciousness was lost during the ascent. The hemorrhage was too severe. He died from catastrophic blood loss caused by a single bite, delivered after drifting out of formation and losing the one thing keeping him alive: eye contact with the predator below. The incident prompted review of diver screening protocols and whether experience minimums should be enforced at high-risk sites. The community debated accessibility versus safety at locations like Tiger Beach. Victor Hale drifted out of position and lost sight of the shark already watching him. For Tana Brock, the threat didn't come from losing sight of the animal. It came from a single piece of hardware that everyone assumed was locked.